With the release of the newest Five Nights at Freddy's game, Secret of the Mimic, comes a whole bunch of new animatronics. And in the coming weeks, we're going to take a look at all of the interesting animatronics from this series. Today, we're going to start off with Jackie. This model starts off at 93,727 faces and 150,923 edges. Now, taking a look at this animatronic immediately, it is super creepy, as all the other FNAF animatronics have been. It's got a very different style of head than any of the other previous animatronics, being a lot more oval and thin than the more general rotund chunky look of the animatronics. It does have a separated faceplate right down the middle, but the nose does actually hook onto one of the sides fully and is not slit down the middle. They use a pretty basic texture for the eye at this point. They're not really going into heavy detail with these animatronics, but if you take a look at these eyelashes, they're two very fun looking deflated balloon like eyelashes. I think the model they use for this is very interesting. He also has a party hat with a little pom-pom at the top, a bunch of red diamond decals along the side of the actual hat, and at the base a nice furl of what I would believe to be material. His hair is very reminiscent to what I imagine a Wendy's animatronic's hair might look like, with the braids going off into two standing pigtails with golden rings at the end to hold it all together. A very interesting weave, to say the least. Taking a look at the inside of his mouth, you can see that he has the speakers that the FNAF sister location animatronics tended to have. This time, instead of being mounted on the chest, however, it's mounted inside his mouth, as sound generally comes from the mouth when people are talking, as everyone should know. As we take a look at the inside of the mouth too, you can see there's little hinges on the jaw as well. I just like to take a look at these little extra details here, because they did take the time to model them, so I want to take the time to review them. He's also got this ginormous bow tie, which has got to hold the record at this point for bow ties in Five Nights at Freddy's. This thing spans shoulder to shoulder if you look at it, and is quite massive. Now, taking a look at his arms, they are extremely long as well. I don't know if this is a record. There might be someone else who technically has it, like a DJ Music Man or something, but these are extremely long and are made very accordion-like in the ripples in its arm. And at the end of his arm, you can see the little skirting right by the wrist before the actual hand starts. And if you notice, the hand actually has a very Ballora-like color scheme, with the whites and blues being very similar to what we would have seen on Ballora back in sister location. Each hand is segmented and has its own joint to control each segment of the finger, which is very uniform at this point in these series, but it's also cool to see the way they chose to joint these animatronics' hands. It tends to change up every game. Now, taking a look at the box, it is very simple, not using too many polys in most areas, but some parts are a little bit more detailed. A lot of the work here is done in the decals alone, but even though that's the case, it still does look really detailed. Taking a peek at the inside, it's not really much aside from the abdomen that just stretches downwards more into the box. There's no hidden message or anything else, just a continuation of the torso. We also have this quick model of Jackie to look at, which is exactly the same aside from the missing box and torso on the bottom. So as you can see, there's a giant coil that leads out of his stomach, which is probably the accordion-like mechanism that allows him to pop out of the box, along with two electrical wires and a aluminum aircraft wire, which would definitely act as the anchor for the retracting mechanism. Now we have the broken down, withered version of Jackie. This one sits at 88,343 faces and 141,837 edges. It retains a lot of the same details as the Jackie we just previously looked at, but one of the biggest differences in this Jackie versus the last one is the eyes. If you take a look, these guys have more of a orange spirally look before and are not just a flat-facing iris texture. As we take a close look at it too, you can see just how detailed and modeled this thing is. Each curve of this eye is not just a decal put on a metal plane. No, this is actually a modeled out, fully cycloning eye. It really does give that crazy look that we needed Jackie to have for the scenes in which they swapped out the normal model for this model. Aside from that, there is just a lot of burns, a lot of scrapes across his face. There's a lot of tatter and ash on his arms, hands, and body. And just like the second model we looked at, he also is missing the bottom of his torso, just retaining the spring and the wires. Since this one is generally pretty similar to the other Jackies we've just looked at, I probably don't have much else to add, so I'm gonna move on to the Mimic. This model sits at 89,405 faces and 152,833 edges. As per usual, this looks like a Five Nights at Freddy's endo and has quite a lot of detail. Just like the previous Jackie we looked at, this one has the same cycloning eyes, but if you take a look at the middle of his skull, you can actually see where the wiring heads to the back of his eye. This is interesting that they added this detail, and would be pretty useful at determining how many mechanisms are actually inside this Mimic. There appears to be 4 wires for each side, so that might mean that there could be 4 different utilities on each side. I'm assuming there's the gyroscope that moves the eyes, the mechanism that acts as the actual lens, and other things, but That's for other people to theorize. You can also take a look at his jaw. He has an interior set of teeth, which are a lot more rounded off, and an external set, which acts more as a canine set of teeth than anything, only having 2 on the top and 2 on the bottom. As we head down to his chest, we can see that there's the main access unit in this box right here with all of the wires heading out of it, and I have got to admit that these wires are a ginormously thick gauge, meaning that they could carry a lot of power. If I'm being honest, this size of wire would only pretty much be used to supply a building as large as a mall, so it's interesting to see that it's actually on an animatronic unit alone. What it more likely is, although they don't typically make these wires look like this, is a giant data wire with a ton of micro wires stuffed in it. But who's to say? This is not a wire theorizing channel after all. This is just a model review. We can see all the interesting mechanisms that they use for the elbow, the wrist, and the shoulder that allow it to move. And as we take a look at the base of them, we can see that those wires continue, but lead down to 2 different leg models. They do copy segments, but the top and bottom segments are swapped for each leg, if you notice that. They're pretty rudimentary looking models anyway, but they're definitely interesting to get to take a look at. Up next, we have M2 RND. This model sits at 123,787 faces and 218,750 edges. So this is the biggest model we will be taking a look at today, and it's no wonder as to why. I mean, just look at the detail on this one. You can see that the head is a mixture of both a Bonnie-ish bunny model with the ears and the shape of the skull, and a literal sutured on Chica model that is literally to the left of his head from his perspective. Just as before, it looks to contain the exact same model as the previous Mimic, with some extra shelling of animatronic parts. Obviously some early renditions that have not been yet faced or painted or anything like that, as you can see by these even little test dummy symbols or caution symbols that you see throughout his forehead, on his arms, and on his legs. They even detailed little screws on the actual plates of this mask to show that it's not ready. Taking a look at the back of Chica's mask, we can see that it's not just tied in with the actual wires, but it's also welded straight onto the mask. Who's to say why or what use this serves the Mimic, but it seems important enough for him to have it welded to the side of his head, so he must need to keep it. As you can see in this arm unit here, there's a little bit of rebar poking out, and actually looks pretty Springtrap-like, as if it was inspired by Springtrap, but obviously could never have been a part of Springtrap, since most of his previous units have been burned. Right by his ear, it seems like there's a little speaker module or something that could record audio or emit audio. Who's to say? It's marked with this little arrow and an A underneath it. Interestingly enough, this part of his elbow right here is actually a jaw model of Freddy's or some other animatronic that resembles Freddy, but is definitely not a standard elbow cap. Also, this shoulder blade is actually just a cupcake model as well. Just like the Chica head, it's tied in with a bunch of wires instead of rope or actually welded on. He's also got one of Foxy's hooks at the end of his hand as well. Seems to be either used or rusted, because there seems to be a little bit of browning at the base of it. This one doesn't seem to use a lot of polys though, and if you've seen any of my previous videos, you know just how deep these Foxy hooks can go in poly count. Interestingly, on his chest, he has a Chica bib that says logo here, which points to the fact that most of these Chica models are probably customizable for each restaurant. An interesting fact that we just now get to learn. Taking a look at his legs, he has a bunch of different units to cover up the endo and protect himself. One of them being the upside down portion of a Bonnie mask. And if all that theft wasn't enough, he does have a foot of Chica's as well on his right foot. Although it is missing the 2 little points and showcases either what is meant to be the bone or the actual just metal of the animatronic, but it looks more like a realistic bone than an actual metal part for an animatronic. Up next, we have Nurse Dolly, who sits at 52,828 faces and 85,595 edges. This model is very simple and rudimentary, although it is very creepy. One thing that's interesting about this model is the eyes. They're not a complete circle like animatronic eyes usually are. They're a very elongated oval shape. There's something that these model creators really liked about oval shapes in this game, because they use it as a base for a lot of these animatronics now. Taking a look at the hair, it is absolutely ridiculous. It is just simple planes that spread out into all directions and looks very crazy. In her mouth, you can see a speaker unit that is not like Jackie's and is more of a band than a actual circle. We can also see that the jaw muscle is completely separated from the mask and has full ability to rotate, as we do see in the game. It does add quite a little bit of creepiness to it though. I mean, just the detachment of it really gives that uncanny valley vibe to it. On her chest, we can see that she has a badge with her name on it, which makes perfect sense, as people who are getting medical attention from this thing might need to see the name tag, even though obviously it's only usually animatronics getting medical attention from her. On her back, we can also see this medic from the base of her backpack to each of her wrists. You can also see the actual defibrillator pad where she would be able to put her hands on the animatronic and send an electric current through it. Her hands are also very simplistic and shovel-like too, only having one main finger unit that goes up and down, connected by a simple rotating pinion rod, and a very weirdly bending thumb. But it does seem to have two articulating joints, which are obviously more than the ginormous finger. You can also see her dress too is pretty low detailed, not too much to really look at in there. As you can see with her shoes here, they are actually welded to the base plate of her animatronic pedestal. They are very simplistic looking shoes, but the detail on the weld is actually very well done. You can see it's not just all texturing, there's some 3D aspects to it as well. And unfortunately, we gotta take a quick look right here. You can see that the dress is held up by a mesh and the kneecaps are actually hovering off of her legs. I don't want to stay here for too long, so let's move on to the burned Nurse Dolly. This model sits at 78,820 faces and 129,041 edges. Obviously, this model is based off the previous model we just looked at, but has some significant differences. Obviously, I want to start off with the drooping and horrifying face. This is definitely nightmare fuel, and any kid who's playing this game is going to have a hard time reacting against this model. Just look at how the molten animatronic drips down from the face, from both the eye socket and the jaw. Her eyelids are in the process of engulfing her whole eye, which is very distressing to see, and there is almost no part of her skin that remains the normal pale that it usually is. The detail of all this burn work, all these different joints being red hot, and all this dilapidation is a really good job. I mean, the arms alone have a ton of detail. The charging port on her backpack has sustained a lot of damages, severing both the wires heading to her hands, and also showcasing a ton of the interior of it as well. You can also see that the wires actually don't have an interior model as well if we get up and close with them. You can see the entire interior of it. That's just a fun detail I thought I should mention for sure. As you can see, her legs have sustained a ton of damage, furling at the bottom completely, and she has lost her shoes entirely as well, being completely stripped down to the animatronic endo. Interestingly enough, since the animatronic is exposed, you can see that there is a heel built into her actual animatronic as well, which is pretty interesting because her original animatronic model doesn't look to have high heels by any means. It looks to just have simple, perhaps maybe quarter-inch raised heels. For our final animatronic models, we're going to look at Big Top today, and this one sits at 83,018 faces and 147,962 edges. Personally, I don't really like this model at all, if I'm being honest. It's not very entertaining and isn't super up my alley, but we're gonna take a look at it regardless. As you can see in the mouth, it has that little music box mechanism that would move the teeth with the little notches on the actual cylinder to play a song. You can imagine that the song might be emitted from the little horns on his head too, right by his hair. He sort of has a George Washington look with the hairstyle he sports, and his eyes are very different from the normal black soulless void that the spider animatronics that Big Top resembles usually have. As you can see, he's got this little bird box as a body, very low effort and does not really fit in any game in my opinion, but it is what it is. A lot of the detail work here is done in the decals again, although the blinds are individually modeled, so that is an interesting fact as well. He's also got these gold arms that stretch all the way down, containing an X-like pattern that would aid in the structural integrity, I guess, with very strange feet, which have those three little teardrop petals that a piano might have at the bottom of it. And just like every other model we've looked at today, there's a more devastated, dilapidated version of it. This model sitting at 92,570 faces and 164,230 edges. Again, looking a lot like the other Big Top. This one's not super impressive. It does contain a lot of damage on the head and the hat specifically, exposing a lot of rebar or wires popping out of it, and his mouth is missing some of the teeth. The horns on his head have also seen some warping and some soot all over them, as well as his hair. His bird box has also lost some of the doors, exposing the mechanism inside, which is pretty well detailed. And his arms, even though containing the X pattern, did not seem to stand the test of time or meet the structural integrity required to hold up this animatronic, because they're all crunched up and ruined. I mean, just take a look. Other than that, that's all the animatronics that I have to look at today. In the next video, we are going to be looking at some more animatronics. You'll just have to wait and see which ones I'm going to be covering then, because realistically, I don't even know yet. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, leave a like and maybe subscribe. Also, check out the merch shop. I dropped some new merch recently, so check that out if you're interested. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.